Hey everyone, this is Tim.
This is Dane.
And welcome to episode 9 of Was It Worth It, brought to you by SharkTank.com. So if this is your first time listening, if we are taking your Was It Worth It virginity, if you will, Was It Worth It is an indie game review podcast where a couple dashingly good-looking gentlemen,
as you can obviously tell,
play an indie game on Steam and then have a discussion about how the game made us feel deep down inside, and then say whether or not it was worth it.
Yeah, usually also the games we pick are probably like under $20 for the most part.
Yeah, it's cheaper games, so instead of getting a score review, it just gets a, pass-fail, essentially.
So this week, we played Violett. Violett is a point-and-click puzzle adventure game published and developed by Forever Entertainment, a Polish company with a number of more casual games under their belt. They seem like a smaller company, although the handful of games they've put out are available on an impressive number of platforms, including Nintendo systems and the PlayStation Vita. Although Violett specifically is just available for all three major computer platforms, Windows, Mac, and Linux, as well as most iOS and Android touchscreen devices. It was released on December 13th, 2013, and retails on Steam for $9.99. Now, in Violett, you play as a purple-haired teenage girl who, much to her dismay, moves to a spooky house in the middle of nowhere. While moping around in her new bedroom, she notices something shiny in a mouse hole on her wall, and when she reaches for it, she finds a strange amulet that takes her to a bizarre and colorful world, loosely based on the popular Wonderland, like Alice in Wonderland. There's an evil spider queen trying to keep her trapped in this strange world, and it's up to Violett to figure out how to stop her and get back home to her parents.
Yeah, and Dane pretty much summed up the plot as much as he could, because there's very little plot development there's essentially no dialogue in the game. It's all pictures and sounds that guide the plot.
Yeah, although when the characters do quote-unquote talk, it's kind of like a weird sped-up, it almost actually sounded like Sims. Although you can kind of hear words in the middle, like really quick words. I think they were actually in Polish, because the game, was developed in Poland.
Yeah, I don't know if you got there, but there was a part where she's on the backside of a window, essentially, and she sees her parents, and she tries to speak to them, and I believe that was actually speaking of language. I don't think that was gibberish, but the rest of the game had...
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you're in this world, and you're just moving forward, clicking things, figuring things out with very little dialogue, like you mentioned, and you're trying to get home. A lot of the game is simple like that, but not necessarily in a bad way, and I guess that's an easy seg to discuss the gameplay.
Yeah, so the gameplay, it's, just like any other point-and-click adventure, you point your mouse, click where you want your character to go, and interact with various objects throughout the world to solve puzzles. Now, the puzzles in this game, some of them were extremely difficult. I was pleasantly surprised because I think that the lack of engaging story, had the puzzles not been engaging, there probably wouldn't have been anything to pull me into the game.
Gotcha.
But the puzzles were done very well, especially in the earlier parts of the game, but I'll get to that later, why the end of the game may have been lacking a bit, but...
Yeah, I agree, the puzzles were pretty satisfying, which I was glad to see that because, I really like point-and-click adventures. It's a lot simpler in design than some of the big-name point-and-click adventure games, like the Monkey Island series or some of Telltale's offerings. You do point and click, as the name of the genre implies, but there are no commands like push, pull, pick up, put down, talk to, etc., like some of the other ones are known for. Like you said, the entirety of Violett is played by simply moving your cursor around and clicking on objects. If you want to move to a specific place on the screen, you click on it, Violett walks there. You can pull items out of your bag by clicking and dragging, and then dropping them somewhere on the screen, but that's really all you're required to do to play the entire game.
Right, that really does sum up the gameplay entirely.
Yeah, and that does make a lot of sense, though, knowing that this game is available not only on the computer, but also on the iOS and Android touchscreen devices, since I imagine it's really simple to play on those devices.
I could actually see it really well on, like, a tablet or something.
Yeah, and the thing about that is I didn't actually mind playing a game like that on my desktop computer, which I definitely couldn't say about Gravity Badgers, you know, the awful iOS/Android port we reviewed a few weeks back.
Yeah, I don't think that's too much of a surprise, though.
But it definitely helps that some of Violett's puzzles are just super clever and brain-twisting, and, you know, also the beautiful, seemingly hand-drawn visuals that we can get to a little later.
Yeah, and sometimes with games that have puzzles this difficult, there's a lot of opportunity for frustration, I should say.
Sure.
But to be honest, that didn't really happen too much. In fact, most of the frustration came from just glitches where, you know, I would try to interact with an object and nothing would happen, and I would, you know, exhaust every other possible thing I could, you know, and then I'd go back and try everything again, and the third or fourth time of trying something, it would finally work.
I did have that experience, and even worse, I actually had at least 2 times where I would click on something that seemed like I can interact with it, and then it wouldn't let me, and it almost seemed like it froze my cursor in a way where I couldn't interact with anything until I restarted the game.
Oh, really? Yeah. I never had that problem.
Yeah, that did happen to me a couple times. It wasn't a huge deal because saving in this game is really easy.
Oh, yeah.
But the other gripe I have, I guess, that you could relate to the gameplay is there's basically these blue, orange, and green orbs scattered throughout every area, and you're encouraged to just find them in these little hidden places and click on them to collect them.
Yeah, I think it's blue, purple, and green, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they're always put in a place where they blend in. The goal was to make them blend in with the background as much as they can.
So you're just kind of clicking on everything.
Yeah, exactly. Or there were objects that you can interact with, but normally in gameplay, if you can interact with an object, the cursor turns into a little hand saying you can interact with this, but there were things that you could interact with that hand never came up. Like, it'd be like a little drawer, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can open that drawer. I put my clicker on it, doesn't turn into a hand, I assume, okay, I can't interact with it. But if you click on it anyway, the drawer will open and one of those little orbs will pop out.
Right.
Now, they don't show the hand because it's not necessary to interact with that to solve the puzzle.
Yeah.
But,
and on top of that, what I was getting at with those orbs is that it doesn't really seem like there's a purpose to them. You collect them, but they're just there for you to collect. And I know that you mentioned to me earlier that the game feels a bit unfinished.
Yeah, and so I guess I can just get to that now. I finished the game, and it's completely obvious that the game was rushed.
Right.
Like, they wanted to do more with the game, and they couldn't, and they rushed to release. Now, that being said, the gameplay, all the core puzzles and everything, they're all finished, and they're all put together and polished really well. However, there are certain things where it's like, okay, I'll interact with this object, and it has no effect on the puzzle as a whole, or there's things where it's like, okay, you get these special abilities at certain points during the game, and the special abilities don't really do much for you other than optional things, and it seems like they were setting up for you to gather these special abilities and have a set of abilities that you can use to get through these final puzzles, but that doesn't really happen. And I think those orbs were almost like, somehow connected with those special abilities.
Maybe like mana to use the abilities.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So, I kind of expected something to happen with those orbs, and nothing ever did, because when you first collect the orbs, you just get like a counter, like, okay, you have 20 of this color and 19 of that one and 23 of that one. And then when you complete certain objectives, the counter turns into a bar, and it looks like a health or mana bar or something. So that's what kind of made me think that maybe it had some sort of connection like that.
Yeah, and I thought it was going to as well. And I didn't finish the game, and you did, so you kind of saw more of how that didn't pan out. But I kind of, I was a little bit bummed to see that it was so rushed towards the end. Especially in, not to spoil anything, but you also mentioned the quote-unquote final boss also feeling super rushed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into it too much, but they kind of set up like a final boss final boss fight with a Spider Queen that Dane mentioned earlier, and it just didn't really happen. Yeah.
Well, I guess to move on to the graphics. The graphics in this game are really interesting. Basically, your character and most of the characters you interact with throughout the game are simple 3D models. Not terrible, not amazing. Now, everything else in the game, from background to foreground, is mostly two-dimensional and incredibly stylized and colorful, almost looking hand-drawn, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and as Dane mentioned earlier, there's definitely a Lewis Carroll through the rabbit hole type of influence, but there's definitely also Salvador Dali and other many other surreal artists influence this game, because every different stage you go to is some bizarre, very surreal setting.
Definitely. Yeah, there's just so much detail and depth in every area, and it's really gorgeous. Like, like you mentioned, the world is loosely based on Wonderland. I don't know as much about other artists' art styles,
Sure.
Surrealism and whatnot. Now that you mention it, I definitely do see the dolly in there.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. And I didn't really think about it while I was playing, but and I'm sure there are plenty of other artists that they referenced that I just don't know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
but
for sure.
but it worked. Like, it's whimsical, detailed, it's very impressive. And they didn't have to put so much detail into the world, since the point-and-click gameplay is so simple, but they did. And it adds a lot to the game. Like, I even like some of the bizarre-looking creatures in the background, like a giant teapot with one eye and nasty monster-like jaws, or a whole group of, like, funky gnome statues with stupid facial expressions.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, I very strongly compare this game's visual style to a card-based tabletop game called Dixit, which has players creating stories or sayings based on the extremely surreal, colorful, and sometimes unsettling artwork present on their cards. I guess that's a good way to describe the visual style of this game. Surreal, colorful, and sometimes unsettling.
Yeah, that pretty much does it. And not only that, but the world is also inhabited by a variety of creatures that you have to interact with.
They're all insects.
Not all, but
really?
they're mainly insects. But
Gotcha.
yeah, there's mole people and there's snails and there's turtles. And,
I did get to the mole people.
Yeah, so there's a little more than just insects, but there's definitely a lot of insects.
Sure. Well, I guess to move forward, similarly to the graphics, the music in Violett is really pretty. Composed by Mikhail Wazalewski, the soundtrack definitely sounds like something that could have been recorded by a symphony. There are plenty of gorgeous piano and string sections with a little bit of synth, and while I can complain that you sometimes hear the same tracks during multiple areas of the game, like they'll repeat when you continue on in the game, they're just so well composed, and they go hand in hand with the visual style in that they sound gorgeous, but occasionally dissonant and slightly unsettling.
Yeah, particularly the melodies that they chose were very, very well suited to the theme of the game.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, you do hear the same tracks over and over and over, but never once did I say, ugh, this track again.
Yeah.
I was always like, yes, this track again.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
me too. Like, I remember, like, one of the first tracks that I heard, I think it was actually that first spot after you first move forward from the first area, you get out of the cage, and then you have to do the teapot thing with the fly.
Mm-hmm.
Even just that track there, like, as I was struggling a little bit, or I guess not necessarily struggling, but it did take me a little while to figure out that puzzle.
Sure.
It just made it a treat to be, like, listening to this really well-composed, really pretty track. Like, it's immersive.
Yeah, and I think that helped, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of difficulty inherent in the puzzles, and I spent a lot of time on some puzzles, but I didn't really get frustrated, and I think having excellent music to listen to while I was doing that definitely helped.
Sure, absolutely.
It was almost like soothing,
Yeah.
countering the frustration with this soothing music.
Absolutely. Now, I guess really the only thing left that we could have mentioned here would be the story, but we already said that there's not that much to it.
Yeah, it's very bare bones, but it gets the job done. I mean, it basically, this game could be an abstract game and have no plot at all, but I guess they wanted one.
Yeah,
what I mean?
Well, I will add that there are a couple of short cutscenes in the beginning and end, and, this fits into graphics a little more, but I felt like they weren't particularly well drawn or highly detailed.
Yeah, I was actually pretty disappointed in that.
Yeah, the cutscenes, like, just like the art in the cutscenes, it was kind of blah.
Yeah, especially contrasted with the way the game looked. Because the game looked gorgeous, and these cutscenes just looked so
There was like nothing
gorgeous.
in the background. It was just Violett making a facial expression.
Yeah,
or
very
yeah,
plain.
they seemed kind of sketched, quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess there wasn't too much to say about this game, other than all the positive things we said.
Yeah, I think, normally at this point in the review, we'd sum up our own, experiences with the game, but I think we pretty much have already done that. I mean...
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do want to say I was excited going in just because it was a point-and-click adventure, and we've never done that on the show. And I want to mention that I'm such a huge fan of the genre. Like, I grew up on the classics, like the Monkey Island series, Full Throttle, the lesser-known Loom. I absolutely love that game. And, I guess at first I was a little surprised because this was a little bit different or a little more simple than those other games, and I was expecting to be let down. But, God, I was just immersed by the visuals and the music, like we mentioned.
Yeah, and I don't really have a lot of experience with more modern point-and-click adventures. I played them a lot as a kid. I didn't play any of the Lucas game or the Lucas Arts ones like you, and I've heard a lot of other people reference as well. I played a lot of Sierra point-and-click adventure games. A lot of them were actually starring a little girl named Pepper, I believe, who was kind of similar to Violett.
Yeah, well, and there's also the putt-putt games. Can't forget those.
Yeah, or my all-time favorite was Corky and Quazo's Turbo Science, which was like part point-and-click adventure, part trivia. And it
educational.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I love the educational games. I'm gonna say. So yeah, I've played a lot of like free Flash games that are episodic point-and-click adventures, but are really short. You know, and they're actually kind of fun if you have a half hour to kill or whatever. I didn't really know what to expect because I hadn't played a lot in recent years. But I was pleasantly surprised. I really was. The puzzles they did it for me. They scratched that itch that, I used to play a lot of puzzle games, and I don't as much these days, and I think I've been longing for a good puzzle game.
Oh, yeah. And in this game, with all of the other goodies we mentioned, I mean, that's a really good way to sort of work your brain.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, a lot of puzzle games are abstract, and it was nice to get a game that looked good, sounded good, but had challenging puzzles. So, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, for me, this game was definitely worth the money.
Yeah, and same here. I had a couple of minor gripes. The game being rushed, the ugly cutscenes, the not always responsive clicks. But those are minor, like I said. I think 4 hours of simple yet immersive puzzle solving is totally worth it for $9.99.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And if you finish the game, it's going to be more than 4 hours.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't know. I don't know how much I spent, but probably 7 or 8.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know, maybe that was just because I spent a lot of time on some puzzles. But,
sure. Yeah. Well, I guess moving forward to next week, unfortunately, there just hasn't been much in the way of new games being released on Steam lately, probably because of the holidays.
Sure.
We do try and cover newer, more relevant games on the show, but it's not always possible. Next week, we'll be playing Stick It to the Man, which was released on the same day as Violett, but man, it looks interesting.
And they used an excellent song for the trailer, and that's really what got my attention.
Yeah, I agree. What was it? The condition?
See what condition my condition is in.
Right, yeah, which actually also was super relevant for what
the
story they were explaining in the trailer. So, it looks really cool. It's a bizarre-looking puzzle platformer that has the potential to be hilarious and entertaining.
Yeah, so, this is the second video that we're actually doing that has an accompanying YouTube video that shows footage. You can also find us on SoundCloud as well as iTunes, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, thanks for listening, guys.
Later.